Hi, I'm Basler. I'm in Houston, Texas, and I want to talk about trees, tree roots, and foundations, and how they can, crack or damage the foundation. Here in Houston, Texas, it's no different from, say, San Antonio, Austin, or Dallas, and a lot of other parts of the country. The soil is mostly clay, and clay soil is like a sponge. It retains moisture, and it drains slowly, and it also expands. It's what we call expansive clay soil. So it's really hard to build a foundation that doesn't shift. There's a whole industry in Texas of foundation repair specialists, where they do piers, and they drive in piers to what they call the point of refusal, and it's super expensive and it's crazy. Plus there was a 30-40 year period where there was really shoddy home building, and the foundation, my property inspector told me that there's a period from like 1970 to 1990 or 2000, I'm not sure, when you just don't want to buy a home that's built in that period. Back to the tree. This is a residential property. This is an 11-year-old home and an 11-year-old live oak. And we're not going to talk about its pruning needs. It's a super nice tree, and I for one, particularly appreciate how this customer allows it to hang low. He's a very avid tree lover. So his tile in his front walk, in his front hallway, there's the front door right there, his tile is cracked, and so he had a structural engineer out, and he said put a soaker hose out. I've had to use a soaker hose on my foundation on homes that I've owned in the past, so that's nothing new. And there's tree roots, there's these surface roots, and you probably know from previous videos where I talk about how if there's only 1 inch of topsoil underneath which is clay or construction backfill or subsoil or other useless soil medium, then you're going to have surface roots here, 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 and so on and on, here. So I recommend people all the time that they call a structural engineer out and get a structural engineer's opinion, because making an opinion about the foundation of the house is outside my expertise. I expect the same of the structural engineer. In this particular case, and I hope to make contact with this structural engineer and perhaps forge a relationship. I need a structural engineer in my Rolodex at the moment. So one of the recommendations that this engineer made was thin the crown, thin out the crown so that the tree will draw less water. Now I'm not convinced that this reflects a sound understanding of tree physiology. Plus, this is an old customer of mine that goes back a very long time. And I don't want to see my customer nickeled and dimed to death. So what a tree does, a tree is a very simple organism. It doesn't have a nucleus, it doesn't have a brain, but it does have energy needs. And how its energy needs are met is by photosynthesis, and it has naturally the requisite square footage of photosynthetic leaf surface to meet its growing energy needs. Now, even if it's root bound, even if its cubic footage of soil volume is inadequate to accommodate its root system in maturity, even if it's stuck between a sidewalk and a house, it still is going to continue to try to grow and meet its growing energy needs. So if we thin this crown out, and if it does achieve the engineer's stated objective of reducing the amount of water that it draws, which I doubt, it still is nevertheless going to fill back in. And so what, is it going to be twice a year that it needs to be pruned? 3 times a year? And so I understand the need to reduce the root growth here, but what it really needs is to have a trench made with an air spade, the roots pruned, and a root barrier installed. That's really what needs to happen. It would be cheap to thin the crown, but it would not achieve the objective, and it would just be a waste of the customer's money. Leaf population drives root growth, and a tree has energy needs and it needs to eat. And let's say you remove 50% of its food making factory, it's going to start filling back in. It's going to react by sprouting aggressively, and it's going to be business as usual subsurface. Let's talk about speaking of subsurface, let's look at this place. Here's my core sample. This is a window into the soil profile. We have approximately 1 inch of topsoil, slightly less, right here, underneath which we proceed directly to clay. And this is pure clay. It's compacted, which means it doesn't have enough porosity. And so the internal drainage is going to be poor. And this is a pretty good explanation of why the roots are on the surface, and after only 11 years, the roots are beginning to be a trip hazard. So, would it be an easy project? No. Would it be simple? No. Is it something that I want to undertake? Not really. We do a lot of trenching and root pruning and root barrier installation, and we do it because we have people who are trained to prune roots and do these trenches and use an air spade and prune them. A ditch witch, which is basically a large chainsaw, is not a pruning tool, and it shreds the roots. So there's these shredded ends which immediately invite root rotting pathogens, and these are ubiquitous in the soil. Phytophthora, all manner of root rotting pathogens, cottony root rot, armillaria, you name it, it's probably in the soil, waiting for an opportunity to, get a finger in the dike, so to speak, or to get a crack in the dam and infect the root system. So the cleaner a pruning cut you make when installing this, when digging this trench to install this root barrier, the better. Better for the tree. And so since we're limited in our soil volume, we have to do something here. And yes, I agree the tree needs to be pruned. It needs to be pruned off the house. It needs to be lightly raised over the sidewalk. I'd prefer only 6 feet. Just enough to keep people from sending me nasty letters, but still leave it hanging low. And yes, it's a little thick in some spots. So I agree with some crown thinning, but I want to be clear about the objectives. We're doing it for the health and shape and promoting good growth habits on the part of a young established tree. As John Worrell of San Antonio says, training it to behave like an adult. But I would not thin this crown with the expectation that it's going to reduce the rate at which the tree draws water. Furthermore, another thing the engineer said, which is partially correct, is if you water out here, then it'll encourage the roots to grow here. Well, that's not going to discourage the roots from growing there. Okay? So I agree, promote root growth everywhere, but I don't think that your lawn fertilizer that's applied in granular form by a spreader is going to affect the tree one bit. This all needs to be fertilized by soil injection. 100% of surface applied fertilizers go to the lawn. So I'm not arguing with the principle. Promote root growth out here and out here too, well beyond the drip line of the tree. But don't think that watering this is going to do anything to discourage roots from growing towards the foundation. My email address is info@wideworldoftrees.com. Also, if you leave a comment in the video on YouTube, I will be notified of it. So feel free to leave a comment or question there. And I also encourage you to leave me a voicemail at my new voicemail hotline, which is 262-724-6701. Thank you for tuning in.